Okay, well, welcome to the latest in the Deckhive Introduces webinar series. And today it's our honour to be joined by Sarah Lewis for the second time, talking about the Positive Organisational Development cards. So today's session probably will be something between 45 minutes, I guess, maybe a bit longer, depending on how many questions people have. But in this series, as you may or may not know, this is where we both about the creators of the decks in the Deckhive library, but also especially about the cards and how we can use them, either in physical form or in online form through Deckhive. So thanks for coming back again, Sarah. It's nice to see you again.
Always a pleasure.
For those who haven't come across you, haven't yet seen the previous version we had that we looked at the Appreciative Inquiry deck, do you want to just give us a bit of...
I'm sorry that broke up. Are you asking for an introduction, basically?
That's a good guess. Yes, I'm just asking for, tell us about how you got to where you are.
Okay, so I'm a chartered organisational psychologist, and I've worked with organisations around organisational change for many years. These cards are an attempt to take the key findings from positive psychology, which is a particular field of psychology that was started by Martin Seligman 25 years ago now, and to take the findings from that and apply them to the field of organisational development and make them relevant for leaders and managers. So essentially I wrote a book about that, and then the cards come out of that book, which we'll probably come on to. In terms of what I do myself, I work in 3 different fields. So I'm an active consultant with organisations, helping them with change challenges of various sorts at the individual, team or organisational level. I also do a lot of teaching and training. So I'm a lecturer on 2 postgraduate courses at the moment, connected with organisational development, so really about positive organisational psychology and appreciative inquiry. And then I also develop products to help transfer learning and development in different formats. So we have cards. I also develop videos in partnership with other organisations. I've written books and so on to try to help people in organisations understand how these exciting discoveries in positive psychology can really help us to create organisations that are good at managing change, that are profitable in themselves, and where people flourish, where it's a good place to work. That's my kind of ambition.
Yeah, fab. Because it's really important, isn't it, to find practical ways to apply this stuff, because it's the average journal article is only read by about, was it 5 people, one of whom is the mother of the author. So it's always good if you can turn it into tangible ways for people to apply the knowledge, because people don't have time to kind of read the articles very often, I guess.
No, that's right. And in fact, the second to last book that I wrote, 101 Ideas for Business, Positive Psychology for Business, was very much that kind of, okay, just give me the so what, what does this mean for me in terms of the challenges? And the original book, Positive Psychology at Work, which was the one I did all the research for, is organised around organisational challenges. So there's a chapter on leadership, teams, communication, performance management, sort of saying, here's the science, here are the challenges that tend to arise, how can we bring the 2 together? And that's really what I suppose I see as part of my mission in life, is to take the knowledge and the research and work out what it means for people in the field one way or another.
So were cards always kind of a key part of your plan for doing that, or did you stumble across the idea of doing it in some form?
No, they were not part of the original plan when I wrote the book. But I do know that not everybody wants to read a fairly dense, reasonably academic, properly referenced, explaining all the research book. They just want, what's the use of this to me? And so the cards sort of came about, it was a bit like an irresistible urge to create them, actually. They came about as a desire to just extract the juice that might be useful to leaders and managers in organisations. Here are 20 key concepts you may not have come across that would help you to create a flourishing organisation here are some questions to stimulate discussion, and here are some ideas to get you started on how you might put this, how you might develop more of this phenomena in your organization.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, and was this your first card deck then?
Yes.
Okay, so the appreciative inquiry ones came later.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess that means it worked quite well with these ones if you wanted to go make some more.
Yeah, I mean, I like them as a tangible thing, a product. You know, they're colourful, they've got pictures, they're very condensed. There's quite a lot of information that's easily accessible, and they just mean that you can work with people in groups in a different way. You know, people aren't all going to read a book, but they can pick up a lot of information in a short time if you've got something like a card set or a game. We sell some games on the site that do the same thing, and of course your products are excellent for that as well.
Well, we hope so.
I know they are.
The more the better, really, isn't it? If we can get some practical tools that work for people, so that's good. So who was it that you, when you first put these kind of cards together, who was it you envisaged would be using them, and where and when?
Yeah, I wasn't too sure about that, to be honest. My hope was it would be people who manage teams and HR, I guess, because the concepts, the positive psychology concepts, are really all about culture. What kind of culture do we want to create in our organization that's going to allow us to both be, you know, a great organization and a great place to work, which they don't always go together, as we know. So that was my hope, that people who were interested in the development of culture, whether it's at a team level or an organizational level, and wanted access to new thinking, because so much of organizational development thinking stems from post-Second World War, believe it or not. You know, from people who were fascinated by the way people behaved during that very difficult time, what was going on in Germany and so on, and how those things arrived, sort of social psychology, and started taking that into organizations. And while some very good thinking has come out of that, it really hadn't been terribly much developed until there was this explosion of the positive psychology. And again, as I suspect you know, the important switch was post Second World War, which was a clearly very traumatic event. A lot of psychology's energy was in all these damaged people, all these damaged institutions, all these damaged social connections. How can we repair them? And it wasn't really until Seligman came along around the turn of the century that that the shift was to how do we achieve excellence? How do we move from normal to fantastic, from normal to flourishing, from surviving to flourishing, rather than from languishing to surviving? And so one of the three pillars from the original thinking, Seligman's original thinking, was that we should be thinking about positive institutions. I forget what the other two are at the moment, but positive relationships and something else, I think. But positive institutions, positive schools, positive organizations where people work and so on. How can we create these as places that encourage flourishing? And so that's, I forget what the question was now, but that's, you know, what this is all about.
Yeah, and is that why the card deck is called Positive Organisational Development cards? Is that kind of the concept behind that then?
Yeah, I had great difficulty with what to call them, really. But it is the application of positive psychology to the challenges of organisational development. And organisational development in itself covers most of what happens in an organisation that's connected to growth or change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, shall we have a look at the cards? Because you mentioned that there are 20 different, I can't remember what the term was used for, sort of categories or
concepts at the moment is kind of what I work with. Yeah.
So we've got just a selection of a few of those out on the table here now, and I can add some more as we're speaking. But so we have two sub decks within this deck. It's probably worth mentioning that. So within Deckhive, where you can use the cards digitally, then we have the top deck here, which has got these 20 concepts, and then we have a separate sub deck here which has got fewer cards in. Mm-hmm. But what's this bit? And we'll talk about it maybe a bit more later, but do you want to just briefly mention what this is?
Yeah, again, essentially, some of these concepts are going to be new to people, like, for instance, that one there, high quality connections, which is a term that comes from the research into how people who don't necessarily know each other terribly well can have a really meaningful, short interaction that generates something, that somehow people come out of that interaction enriched, whether it's with an idea or support or boost to morale or something. It's been a generative interaction. So the other cards, the pink card underneath, the ones you were just looking at, they have a short definition of each of the concepts on them for people who haven't come across them before. And of course, if you want to understand the concepts, you can't really read them easily on the screen. Oh yeah, well done. So somewhere we were looking at high quality connections, so it would have been on the other side or a previous card. And it also, of course, if people want to know more, they're referred back to the original book, which is Positive Psychology at Work. All of these concepts are explored fully in that book. But you don't need the book to use the cards. I think it's important to say that. And that's why we put these short kind of definitions in, so that,
Okay, so if we take, well, let's take social capital as an example. What's the structure of the cards themselves? What have we got on? If I flip this one over.
Keep it on the other side, just one side one, just for the moment, so you can see, or if you enlarge it, you can see that there is like an action word there. So it says activate social capital. So on the front of all of them, we've tried to make these into action verbs. These are things you can do. These are things you can create. They're not just ideas. So that's the first thing. And obviously there's a picture to kind of illuminate what it might look like. It's just if you want to turn it over, then there's some other features on the back. So at the top of the white section, these are some questions that you can use to stimulate discussion. So give an example of when trust facilitated a speedy response. So when an organization has good social capital, it means that information flows easily around the organization, and that's partly because people trust each other. So it's kind of exploring the trust element. And then, does information flow around your organization? If not, where does it get stuck? So that's kind of looking at where the system and the social capital isn't working so well. And then, can you help people recognize social capital as valuable? In other words, some organizations are very siloed. And if people wander out of their silo and go and talk to somebody in a different division, it's seen as a waste of time. Whereas, in fact, the research shows that we need to have these kind of inter-siloed connections to facilitate things happening at a lower level, so that not everything gets escalated up to top management to decide. But a lot of organizations, if you're not at your desk, where are you? If you're not talking to people in your section, why are you talking to them? So it's not always recognized as valuable. It's sometimes seen as a bit of a inefficiency that people are conducting these kind of other relationships. But actually, it really adds value if the organization knows how to use it. And then the second part, sorry, did you want to say anything?
No, that's fine, carry on.
So the second part is just the beginnings of some ideas about how you could start to activate the social capital in your organization. So we've got investing in bringing people together to learn about each other's worlds. As you know, I'm a huge fan of the dialogic OD approaches like appreciative inquiry, open space, World Cafe, and so on. And all of these are exactly about that. They allow people to get a much bigger mental model of the whole organization, not just their part in it. Recognize trust as a business asset. Things happen so much faster in organizations, and it reduces the cost if people trust each other, can trust each other with information. And then, of course, this will be music to your ears, I'm sure, the idea that if we can work to strengthen an organization and the relationships exist, that we can use each other's strengths to kind of compensate for cut the other word. Anyway, areas where we don't have strengths, but we can bring a number of strengths together so that as a unit, we have everything we need playing to people's strengths, rather than people having to do things they're either they either have no natural aptitude for, or they're really not interested in doing. So that is, you have to have the social capital to be able to be that flexible, I suppose.
Yes, yeah. It's about how people are working collectively together. And are the majority of these concepts about that kind of collective experience, or is there a mixture of kind of individual sort of focused concepts and sort of team level or broader level concepts?
Yeah, because they're essentially organizational phenomena. They kind of occur at all levels: team, organizational, individual. So we'll be seeing later how you can use these at an individual level for, I think we're going to look at a performance appraisal, which could also be a coaching session. And you can use them as a team, and you can use them at an organizational level. Just to say as well, each card, as we can see on the back here, it says, oops, just turn it over again, sorry.
Yeah.
It says social capital promotes resilience. So each of the cards have a little sort of catch line at the top that tells you why it's valuable to the organization. And also just at the bottom of the white card of the section, there's kind of a little sort of memorable phrase to try and capture this concept in, shall we say, plain English. So social capital is all about building bridges. Really helps the organization adapt more quickly to change, which is part of resilience, obviously.
Okay, so
right,
so we have all 20 within the deck here then. So
yes,
so at a very basic level, someone can go through, look at the main headings there, and pick out sort of cards that sort of appeal to them in whatever particular way, whichever exercise we're giving people to use. And although you can flip over all the cards at once, obviously in this pack you're probably less likely to do that in Deckhive, I guess, because you're often going to start at the higher level and the visual level, aren't you, and then go to the detail later.
Yeah, I mean, in a very general term, they're just there to stimulate discussion about what are these concepts, how are they relevant to our organization. Just looking at the ones you've got here, you can see some of them are kind of strengths and psychological capital we can see as being something you can think about very much on an individual level, whereas high quality connections and social capital and generativity are probably more around groups of people. So to answer your previous question, there's sort of a mix of ideas.
Well, should we move on and think about, so how might they be used, and some examples around that? So if we move on to our second table that we've prepared, we've got a couple of sticky notes we've added, and we've got some cards that are pre-selected. So what's going on here? What would have been the sort of activity, and with who?
Yeah, one of the ways I've used these cards is with senior teams who are involved in strategic development. And it's really to help them think about the kind of organizational culture they need to support those strategic objectives. And so what we'll often do is take the 20 cards and ask people to kind of rank or order them in where our focus seems to be at the moment. What we've done here is ask, which of these are we doing at the moment? In other words, within our organization, which of these do we have an awareness of? Are we invested in creating? So these are kind of quite common ones. A lot of organizations have got hold of mindfulness and find ways, because it connects to well-being at work. Organizations are all over engagement. It's the absolute key to organizational life. And positive emotions, or positivity, is one of those ideas that's really made the transition from the ivory tower of the research into ordinary life, shall we say, and organizational life. But then, so that's the first part of the exercise. And then the second part is given our strategic objectives to be able to achieve this. And these are often, of course, a lot of change in a small amount of time, or becoming faster and more flexible, or becoming more efficient and be able to reduce cost. What kind of things would be really helpful? So, for instance, authentic leadership that people trust and will follow. That's obviously key to getting an organization to move fast. Resilience, change always involves setbacks, because you're moving into the unknown. The world doesn't necessarily react the way you're expecting, or things change. So resilience becomes very important when you start looking at change. It's a bumpy journey usually. Collective intelligence, just this idea that if we can get everybody, at least for a time, focusing on the challenge and coming up with ideas to help us adapt to the changing some circumstances, or to seize the opportunity that suddenly appeared in front of us, that's it's much more effective than just relying on a few people at the top of the organization. And of course, that takes us back again to the dialogic OD kind of methodologies. And then connectivity is very much connected to kind of the building of social capital, but it's about information and ideas flowing around fast. And when organizations are engaged in change, that's something they really struggle with. Information gets so far down the hierarchy and then it gets jammed. So people at the top have a very, but the bottom, if I can quote that kind of hierarchical idea of organizations, people on the front line, shall we say, often have a very different idea of what's going on than the people at the top had in mind when they initiated some particular change activity. So I use it like that to try to get them to think beyond the things that go into the strategic plan in terms of the objectives and the job roles and the organizational structure and the organogram and all the rest of it, to, okay, that's what we want to do, but how do we need to be together to be able to really make this strategy come alive?
Yeah. So, and then will you use the prompts and the text on the back of the cards to kind of take that to a deeper level other than that sort of initial selection?
Absolutely right. So, I mean, obviously, when I'm with them, I can facilitate the discussion. But if people were doing this for themselves, then again, these questions are the kind of cue to deepening the conversation. So they might want to look at the definition on the pink cards that we were looking at earlier, and then actually start with that very kind of appreciative inquiry discovery question when describe the most authentic leadership that you have experienced. And this is valuable because it not only helps people turn the words into behaviors, because they start thinking about, well, what did that mean for me? They also start to relive how it felt to be working with someone they experienced as an authentic leader, and what that did for their kind of engagement, motivation, goodwill, willingness to take risk, etc., etc. And then it starts to seem it's easier for them to see how this would add to the strategy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see. Okay. It would make a lot of sense then to be able to use a sticky note function, wouldn't it, within Deckhive, to be able to add a sticky note, for each person could do their own and add their own kind of comments that kind of help to make it more tangible for them, both in terms of answering those questions there, but then thinking about, so what would this look like for me going forward?
Absolutely. And you can also use them as a kind of the flip chart function, because very often when you're having these sorts of discussions, you want to record moments of commonality, the things that people land on and say, oh, yes, we need that, or that would be important for us, or that sounds like us, or whatever it is. So you could use them in that kind of collective way as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, let's move on to the third table that we have. This space is a bit busier, isn't it? So we've actually got all the cards, haven't we? All 20 concepts laid out here.
Yes.
And we've got this question: how good do we believe we are at present on a 1 to 5 scale? So we've pre-created some sticky notes with numbers on, with the potential then for people to be able to drag those numbers around rather than having to create them themselves. The reality right now is that using Deckhive to do this, it's a bit of a faff. It takes a little while to do that, although we can duplicate this session, so that would save us time if we were going to do this kind of activity repeatedly. So then what would the process have been with something like this, if you're doing this either kind of with real cards and real sticky notes, or this virtual version? Yeah,
it's really like a self-assessment tool, a quick way of assessing where do we believe we are at the moment with these different aspects of organizational life that have been shown to have value in terms of creating profitable and flourishing organizations where adaptable and sustainable organizations. And so it's just an initial, well, I mean, you can use the cards all sorts of ways, but in this instance, it's let's just get an overview of where we think we're starting from. And then again, of course, you can take it in whatever direction you want. You can look at the ones that we seem to agree that we have and kind of consolidate that conversation and explore, well, how do we know that and where do we see it and how can we build on that, because it seems to be an existing strength in our organization. And then you could look at the ones that have got, are all zeros or ones and sort of say, well, is this important? Would it be an area that we wanted to develop? How could we use some of the existing things to help with that? And so on and so forth. Or you could say, well, never mind what our ratings are, what do we actually think? And this takes us back to the previous conversation a little bit. Are the 5 most important for a project or a forthcoming change or even a process? Say it was HR reviewing their performance process. So they might look at it and say, which of these are most important in our culture, to have in our culture, so that our performance process works well.
Yeah.
Because performance processes don't take place in a vacuum. And so often they're treated as if they're something separate from the culture. And if the culture doesn't support the process, then, well, strange things happen.
Yeah. Yes, I can imagine that working really well in here, that idea of people choosing cards for their own personal reflection. So like the 5 most important as I see it, and then to be able to compare. So, I mean, we haven't prepared this one, but if we have a table like that, I can imagine, us creating a different sticky note for each person. And then under there, that person would just simply choose the cards that they think are the ones that they would want to add to that table, and then create a little stack like that. And then quite quickly, we'd be able to get a good sense, wouldn't we, across the group about how much commonality is there and how much difference is there, and that even in a very organic way can then lead us to very, very valuable conversations beyond that.
Yeah, another way of using them that we haven't created a table for is almost like a game. So you could give, as you were doing here, you could give people there, each give them a number of cards. So we kind of dealt out the whole cards. Mm-hmm. And then you could have a discussion about the topic, whatever it is, whatever's on the team or organization's mind. And then each person looking at the cards they've been dealt has to pick one and kind of say, look, I think this is important in the light of the challenge, the project, the opportunity, because, and it's just another way of stimulating debate and discussion that takes these ideas into account, as well as the usual kind of problem solving approach that people have to challenges and opportunities and new projects. So coming at them from a different way. Yeah, so it might be, we feel a lot of our staff are very disengaged, and they talk about why that might be or how big a challenge it is or whatever. So then the question would be, okay, out of the cards in your hand, which one do you think, if we could generate more of this in our organization, would go some way to changing the situation in a positive way? So, it's just up to people and their inventiveness, really.
Yeah, so that's the lovely thing about cards generally, isn't it? As a facilitator or as a coach, it gives you a toy to play with. It helps to engage people in very different ways. And it sometimes can be used as a way of forcing that choice, that by then making that requirement for a decision to be made, then you have to understand the concepts a little bit better, don't you, in order to make that choice.
Yes, so sort of prioritizing, which is never easy to do. I think you're right. Things like the cards, these cards particularly, have 2 ambitions. One is to stimulate conversation and discussion around important things, organizational culture and organizational development. But the other is to introduce new information that people may not be familiar with, to broaden and give a different depth to their discussions. Give them somewhere else to go with all these organizational challenges that, organizations are a very interesting phenomena, and they are full of irresolvable tensions. And they need to be shifting all the time, because no it's like a flock of birds or a swarm of bees. There isn't a fixed position that is, this is it, we've got it now, this is how our organization needs to be. It has to adapt all the time. And so these discussions are ongoing, and the more kind of information we have about what helps an organization be adaptable, the better, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so wasn't anything else you wanted to say about this exercise here?
No, I think that's, I think the way I had to say, well, only to say, because we were setting this up yesterday, I think your production of these little sticky number cards is really helpful, because being able to do this on screen, normally when you do it in real life, no, in a physical space, that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
You've got a big table and people are sticky notes, and it's all very kind of messy. And I wasn't sure that, how Deckhive could actually accommodate it, but this looks really neat, and I can see exactly how it would work really well. So yeah,
really good. I can imagine it could. I mean, obviously you're slightly limited by the size of the group. If you had a really large group and so there were lots of stickies, then that might start to get a bit more tricky to manage, or you'd certainly just allow a bit more space around the cards for the stickies to be placed. The biggest time factor, just on a practical note, is the duplication of these. So what I did was just create the first 5 in different colors for each number, and then simply duplicate each one. So which you can just kind of duplicate, and then move them around, or even just have them all kind of in a stack together, and people just take the top one, so you don't have to lay them out in the way I did.
And presumably you could do it the other way around, where it's the color coding is by person. So Sarah's are all blue and Joe's are all green, and
absolutely,
so on and so
and then they could just they could just type the numbers into the sticky notes themselves. So that's another way of doing it. So,
and also whoever was setting up the exercise, if they wanted, could just select less cards, the ones that they felt were relevant to the discussion. So there's no obligation to have all 20 out. This was just a kind of very, well, this is interesting, let's see what we think we've got and haven't got at the moment. And
so I guess it partly depends on how much time you've got for this kind of discussion and activity within what it is you're doing. Do you typically aim to have sessions which are just focused on these cards and the concepts within them, or would you sometimes use them as like a half an hour slot within something broader?
To be fair, I think it's mostly the latter. So it's part of either a training process or a change process or some team development or something. This would be part of a bigger design normally.
So what was on the final table then that we'd prepared?
Yes, I was thinking about, and I have used these actually on a more individual level for, I've used them in different ways. I've used them in performance appraisal, and I've used them when people are about to take on a new project and are kind of thinking about what that means for them, and so on and so forth. So this was sort of putting this together. I was thinking about a performance appraisal. So we're asking someone, which of these do you experience at work at the moment? So out of all of these, which would you say are part of your experience working here? And this person said, basically, they feel engaged. They experience moments of flow, which again, some of us will know is very connected to engagement. It's that sense of being really lost in what you're doing, feeling very good about what you're achieving. And they feel that they can draw on the collective intelligence of people around them. So they've got good connections. They can work with other people. And we're thinking about where they're going to go forward and so on. So the next question is looking more broadly. So that's what they experience at the moment. But then there is, what's most important to you? What do you really, out of these concepts, do you personally really value? Which may not be the same thing at all, of course. And this person has chosen, they really value positive deviance. Now, positive deviance is the interest in the exceptionally good and working out how that occurred, as opposed to our default interest in organizations in the exceptionally bad and working out how to prevent it. That continues to be important, of course, but we often overlook the learning that can be gained from studying the best and the exceptionally good and the exceptional performance, and working out how how people who have broadly the same resources or are in broadly the same situation as us are somehow managing to create something better, managing to do more with that. There's some really lovely research around studies into positive deviance and the small things that so often make such a big difference when you go and look about how people do things in their department or their domain of influence and the kind of culture that they manage to generate there and how that affects the working environment, how people feel, and in very particular their habitual behaviors. Mm-hmm. So the medical world has been very interested in this in terms of how do you manage virulent and dangerous infections in organizations. I think it's MSRA, is it? Mm-hmm. The one, that flesh-eating one. And why were some wards so much better than others? When they all had the same number of cleaning staff, they all had the same cleaning fluids, etc. Why was there this difference? And it's really going along and seeing, what are these people doing that's different, that makes a difference? And it's often small things, like just really small things and so psychology based, like having the gloves you're supposed to put on before you do something right there when you're about to do it, as opposed to they're in that cupboard down the corridor, third on the left, get the key from Mary, It makes all the difference. But you can't, if you tell people from outside the system, they'll say, oh, well, yes, but it's easy for you to say that, blah, blah, blah. But when it's their colleagues just in the next block or on a floor below, and they find it for themselves, then somehow we allow the information in a different way. It's fascinating. Anyway, I could do enough.
Yeah, but it's about creating the conditions for success. Often,
absolutely.
Yeah, don't make things hard for ourselves. If there are quick wins we can make, then
yes, to a large extent, it's discovering other people's quick wins and can we apply them here.
Yeah. Okay, so I can see how this would really quite change the typical experience of performance reviews and performance appraisals, wouldn't it? If you're having these kind of conversations, this feels like a much more enjoyable conversation.
Well, I've done a lot of work with HR departments over the years, and it did strike me a number of times the kind of paradoxical thing that performance reviews and performance appraisal and performance management is all supposed to be motivating. It's supposed to encourage people and make them feel better, and so often it has a completely different impact. So I think anything we can do to restore its original ambition to help people feel motivated and engaged at work, and for it to be more of a mutual conversation of discovery about how can we help you feel more motivated and engaged at work, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Okay, well, in a second then, we can see if there are any questions that anybody has. Was there anything else you wanted to mention other than the resources that we can point people towards in a moment? But,
that was, I think, the last thing,
yeah. Okay, well, while people are thinking of questions they might want to ask in the chat, then I will just close this session and show everybody how to navigate A, to the deck, and B, to those extra resources. So if we go to the library within the Deckhive system, then you can see all of the different card decks that we've got available at the moment, and more are being added all the time. But you will find the Positive Organisational Development deck down there. And then when you click on that, you'll see the introduction to the deck. You'll see a little video that Sarah's done that kind of explains some of what we've covered again today, just a very brief intro to the deck. And at the bottom, you'll see this how to use section. So for many of the decks within the library, there are these additional resources you can download or links to other external resources. So you've got a couple of things here that are available, and these are only available to people who are on one of our paid plans, because it's only on those paid plans you have access to this deck, isn't it? Along with the others in the library. So what are these two downloads that we've got here?
Yeah, the first one there, it introduces the pack and it gives some general ideas for how to use them, and then seven more specific ones As you can see, leadership development, performance appraisal, career counselling, focusing on culture, positive approach to specific challenges, increasing motivation and morale, and turning strategy into action. So there's just a few lines on each of those about how these cards can help. And of course, these aren't to limit how people use these cards. It's entirely up to what they're able to come up with. I mean, I've used them with teams where I've asked them at the end of the team session to pick one of the cards that is most meaningful to them about what we've created during the team session, or if they could take one of these things away and kind of protect it, which one would it be, and just things like that. And that can be a very interesting end to a session. Anyway, so however you want to use them. And then the other one is a little bit like it takes us through that strategic process I was talking about earlier, in terms of where are we now, where do we want to be, what culture do we need to develop to support our emerging strategy.
Thank you. Okay, well, let me just close that back down again. I don't think there's probably much else I need to say about Deckhive as a platform, because you've seen how that works if you haven't already. There are, I should mention though, that there are a number of useful tutorials. So if you go to the support link at the bottom of the website, that's where you'll find a number of different video guides and so on, which will help you to learn how to use the system if it's not immediately obvious to you. And we also have some other webinars. We have a tutorial webinar which we run on a regular basis, and a general intro one which is just half an hour. So if you wanted to get a more general sense of how do you use this platform, then please sign up for one of those. And we also have other of these Deckhive Introduces webinars. So we've done quite a few now. I can't remember how many exactly, maybe 10, 12 or more actually of these sessions now. We have all of the previous sessions recorded and available on our YouTube channel. And then of course we have some others coming up. So if you want to sign up to another live one in the future, then please look out for the opportunity to join one of those so you can ask questions.
And your Deckhive, your YouTube channel is called Deckhive if people are searching for it, is it? Yes,
you should be able to find it through Deckhive. And if you can't, then on our website again, at the bottom here, you'll see the YouTube link, and you can find us through that route. So yeah, hopefully you'll find us. If you can't, then just drop us a line and we'll point you in the right direction. So talking of questions, Nicola's asking, do you think then may now be I'm not sure I understand that question, Nicola. Do you understand that, Sarah? Maybe Nicola needs to unmute to explain to us.
Within the context at the time,
okay.
Sarah had been talking about how positive psychology grew out of post-war reaction to post-war and the desire to build something good, which I was just cheering you, but that's why I turned my video off, because I thought I don't want to do that in public. And I wondered whether there could now be a similar push for wellness post-COVID, because everyone's had a little think about how they spend their time, what they do with their lives, how they travel, how they work, and I think there is another opportunity for, we'd be on the fourth wave now of positive psychology.
I think that is a really interesting question, because it's very clear that a lot of people have discovered there's another way of living that doesn't involve giving hours of your life, to a workplace every week and every year. And maybe organizations are going to have to work a little harder to make themselves attractive places that people want to come into, where they really do get the benefits of working with other people in a supportive and collaborative, etc., and engaging way, rather than just coming in for the day, sitting in my rabbit hutch and then going home for the day. Might as well do that at home, kind of thing. So I think that's one thing, definitely. Another thing I noticed towards as COVID restrictions were beginning to lift was an awful lot of organisations have done incredibly well, particularly the health service and education, to keep going, but at some cost, particularly for people who joined the organisation during the lockdown, who'd had to join virtually and work virtually and had missed out on all that early kind of socialising and induction and so on. And kind of, I was trying to encourage organisations to think you need to positively create that experience that they missed, so that they feel connected and held and part of the organisation. So I think, yeah, it could be very interesting. I think it does create a real challenge for organisations that have just taken it as read that people will come in 5 days a week and, you know, be glad.
Yeah. And it's been such an unusual phenomena that we haven't really had anything like this before, really. Not an interruption like this other than war.
Yeah.
Which thankfully, you know, really hasn't, well, there have been wars, but, you know, not.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think if people were to look, the field of positive psychology would offer a lot of cues and support for how to make up for the missed experience and create what they want more quickly than just allowing it to happen by chance over time, which is what people often tend to do.
Yes.
So yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for explaining, Nicola. That makes sense when you explain the context like that. So that's fab. So if there are any other questions, feel free to unmute and ask away. If there aren't, then we can wrap up, unless you've thought of anything else important you want to mention, Sarah.
No, I think we've covered everything we hope to. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you for your time, for being here. It's really nice to see you again. Thank you for having your decks of cards available in Deckhive, so people can discover them and experiment and play with them. Of course, the printed versions are available as well if people want to buy those. So where would they find them and you?
Yes, well, they can come to, it's long but it's simple, so it's www.thepositivepsychologyshop.com. And there we sell Martin's cards, we sell our own cards, and we also sell many other positive psychology learning and development tools. I just managed to type that in. Very bad at doing two things at once. And you can also buy my books there, and so on and so forth. So we try to bring together some of the best of the positive psychology learning and development materials, and more and more are being developed all the time, so hard to keep up, but yeah. So thank you for that question. That was good.
All right, well, yeah, so thanks everyone for being here, and we hope you find some of the other sessions to watch. Even if it's at double speed, I often think it's a bit more entertaining to do these things at double speed, isn't it, and then have to go back to the bits you miss. Yeah, if any questions or thoughts you have about Deckhive and how to make the most of it, then we're always pleased to be in touch with everybody. So I hope it's a useful tool. I hope it's a useful deck, and we'll see you again soon.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Martin.